congressional hearing room fell silent as Representative Jasmine Crockett slowly pulled a manila folder from her briefcase. Governor Kristi Noem, who had been confidently defending her border policies for the past hour, suddenly went pale. What happened in the next 30 seconds would become the most explosive political moment of the year, leaving millions of Americans questioning everything they thought they knew about border security. "Governor Noem," Crockett said, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife, "before you continue telling this committee about your success at the border, perhaps you'd like to explain this document." She held up a paper that would change everything. "This is your signature, isn't it?" The South Dakota governor's hands gripped the edge of the witness table. Her perfectly composed appearance, the navy blue suit that had projected authority just moments before, now seemed to constrain her as she struggled to maintain composure. The cameras captured every second as Noem's eyes darted between the document and the exits. What Crockett revealed next sent shockwaves through American politics and had Noem storming out of the hearing in a way nobody had ever seen before. But before we dive into this incredible showdown, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss these explosive political moments that shape our nation. Drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from, and let's dive into the most shocking congressional testimony of the decade. To understand the magnitude of what unfolded in that hearing room, we need to understand the two powerful women at the center of this political earthquake. Kristi Noem had built her entire political brand on being tough on the border. The 52-year-old South Dakota governor had risen to national prominence with her hardline stance on immigration, her deployment of National Guard troops to Texas, and her constant criticism of federal border policies. With her ranching background and no-nonsense demeanor, she had become a conservative superstar, frequently mentioned as a potential presidential candidate. And she walked into that hearing room on this Tuesday morning expecting another opportunity to showcase her border credentials. Standing at the witness table, Noem had begun her testimony with characteristic confidence. She spoke about South Dakota's contribution to border security, despite being over 1,000 miles from Mexico. She highlighted the dangers of drug trafficking reaching her state, the importance of supporting Texas and Arizona, and her belief that every state was now a border state. The Republican members of the committee nodded approvingly. Fox News was carrying the hearing live. Everything was going according to plan. But Jasmine Crockett had done her homework. The 33-year-old representative from Texas's 30th district was no political novice, despite being relatively new to Congress. A civil rights attorney before entering politics, Crockett had earned a reputation as a fierce interrogator who came to hearings prepared with facts, not just talking points. Her district included parts of Dallas, and she had seen firsthand the complexities of immigration issues, the human stories behind the statistics. Crockett had spent weeks preparing for this moment. Her staff had been digging through records, filing Freedom of Information Act requests, and connecting dots that others had missed. She knew that Noem would come prepared with her usual rhetoric about border invasions and cartel threats. But Crockett had something different in mind. She had evidence that would expose a massive contradiction in Noem's position, something that would reveal the governor's true motivations. The stakes couldn't have been higher. This hearing wasn't just about border policy, it was about truth in government. About politicians saying one thing to voters while doing another behind closed doors. The House Oversight Committee's examination of state responses to border issues had attracted national attention, with C-SPAN, Fox News, CNN, and every major network carrying the proceedings live. That millions of Americans were watching, looking for answers about one of the most divisive issues facing the nation. Noem had brought her A-team to Washington. Her chief of staff, her communications director, and her policy advisors sat in the row behind her, ready to pass notes and provide support. They had rehearsed potential hostile questions, prepared detailed responses about South Dakota's National Guard deployment, and compiled statistics about drug seizures and criminal apprehensions. They thought they were ready for anything, but Crockett had an advantage they hadn't anticipated. Through her connections in Texas, she had obtained documents that painted a very different picture of Noem's border stance. Documents that showed private communications, financial records, and agreements that the governor had desperately tried to keep hidden from public view. The folder in Crockett's briefcase contained political dynamite, and she was about to light the fuse. The committee room itself seemed to understand the gravity of the moment. The wood-paneled walls, the formal setting that had hosted countless historic hearings, provided the perfect backdrop for this confrontation. The portrait of George Washington looked down as if bearing witness to another chapter in American democracy's ongoing struggle with truth and accountability. As Noem continued her opening statement, talking about the crisis at the border and the need for strong state leadership, Crockett sat quietly, occasionally making notes on her legal pad. Other representatives asked routine questions about funding, coordination with federal agencies, and public safety concerns. Noem handled them all with practiced ease, her responses polished and politically effective. But those watching carefully might have noticed something. Crockett wasn't just taking notes. She was arranging documents in a specific order. She was building a case, piece by piece, like the skilled attorney she was. Her staff members behind her exchanged knowing glances. They knew what was coming, and they knew it would be devastating. The temperature in the room seemed to rise as Noem's initial testimony concluded, and the committee moved to the question and answer period. Republican members lobbed softball questions, allowing Noem to expand on her talking points about border security being a national issue, not just a border state concern. She spoke passionately about the fentanyl crisis, human trafficking, and the need for physical barriers and increased enforcement. Democrat members pressed harder, questioning the cost of deploying South Dakota National Guard troops to Texas, asking about the actual threat to South Dakota residents, and challenging the governor's statistics. Noem deflected and redirected, using each question as an opportunity to reinforce her message about the Biden administration's alleged failures and the need for state action. Then it was Crockett's turn. The committee chair announced her name, and the Texas representative leaned forward to her microphone. The room seemed to hold its breath. Even those who didn't know what was coming could sense that something significant was about to happen. The energy had shifted like the moment before lightning strikes. Governor Noem, Crockett began, her voice calm but carrying an undertone of steel. Thank you for being here today. I want to start by asking you about your statement from last month where you said, and I quote, "Every dollar spent on border security is an investment in American safety." Do you still stand by that statement? Noem straightened in her chair, sensing a trap but not sure where it was. Absolutely, Representative. Border security is national security. The threats we face from drug cartels, human traffickers, and criminal organizations affect every state in this union. Crockett nodded slowly, as if considering the response. I see. And in your testimony today, you mentioned that South Dakota has spent approximately $12 million deploying National Guard troops to the Texas border. Is that correct? Noem replied confidently. And I would spend it again. The people of South Dakota understand that what happens at the border doesn't stay at the border. The drugs that pour across end up in our communities, destroying families. I understand, Crockett said, shuffling through her papers with deliberate precision. Now, Governor, I want to ask you about the funding sources for these deployments. Can you tell the committee where that $12 million came from? Noem's eyes narrowed slightly. This was trickier territory. South Dakota used a combination of state emergency funds and private donations to fund the deployment. This innovative public partnership allowed us to protect our citizens without placing an undue burden on taxpayers. Private donations, Crockett repeated, letting the words hang in the air. That's interesting. Can you tell us who these private donors were? The donations were processed through proper legal channels, Noem responded, her tone becoming defensive. Everything was done in accordance with state law and federal regulations. I'm not questioning the legality, Governor. I'm asking about transparency. Who funded South Dakota's border deployment? Noem shifted in her seat. Various concerned citizens and organizations who share our commitment to border security contributed to the effort. Crockett pulled out her first document. Governor, are you familiar with the Patriot Defense Fund? The color began to drain from Noem's face, but she maintained her composure. I'm aware of various organizations that support border security efforts. That's not what I asked, Crockett pressed. Are you familiar with the Patriot Defense Fund specifically? Yes, I believe they were one of several organizations that contributed to our efforts. Crockett held up a document. According to records obtained by my office, the Patriot Defense Fund contributed $8 million to South Dakota's border deployment. That's 2/3 of your total funding. Wouldn't you say that's more than just one of several organizations? Noem's chief of staff leaned forward, whispering urgently in her ear. She waved him off. The Patriot Defense Fund is a legitimate organization committed to supporting law enforcement and border security efforts. I see, Crockett said, pulling out another document. And can you tell the committee who runs the Patriot Defense Fund? I don't have that information in front of me, Noem replied, her voice losing some of its earlier confidence. Well, I do, Crockett said, her voice rising slightly. The Patriot Defense Fund is run by Marcus Sterling, who also happens to be the CEO of Sterling Defense Contractors. Are you familiar with that company, Governor? The hearing room began to buzz with whispers. Several committee members leaned forward, suddenly very interested in where this was going. The reporters in the gallery started typing furiously on their laptops. I'm aware of many defense contractors, Noem said carefully. Sterling Defense Contractors, Crockett continued, has received over $200 million in contracts for border wall construction and technology deployment along the Texas border. Did you know that, Governor? I don't keep track of every private company's contracts, Noem responded, but her voice was starting to crack. Well, perhaps you should, Crockett shot back, especially when they're funding your National Guard deployments. She pulled out another document. Governor, I have here a copy of an email sent from your personal email account to Marcus Sterling, dated 3 months before the Patriot Defense Fund donation. Would you like me to read it to the committee? Noem's hands were now visibly shaking. I communicate with many business leaders and concerned citizens about border security issues. This email doesn't seem to be about border security, Governor, Crockett said, adjusting her glasses as she read. It says, and I quote, Marcus, the deployment will create perfect conditions for expanded contracts. Your support ensures we both benefit, the public gets security, and private enterprise gets opportunity. End quote. Can you explain what you meant by we both benefit, Governor? The room erupted. Committee members started talking over each other. The chairman banged his gavel, calling for order. Noem's staff was in full panic mode, passing notes and whispering urgently, but Crockett wasn't done. Order! Order! The chairman shouted. Representative Crockett, you may continue. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Crockett said, her voice now carrying the confidence of a prosecutor who knows she has her case won. Governor Noem, I have here another document that I think the American people deserve to see. She held up a financial disclosure form. This is your amended financial disclosure from last year, filed quietly on a Friday afternoon before a holiday weekend. It shows that you own stock in 3 companies that have received border security contracts. Combined value approximately $3 million. Did you disclose this conflict of interest when you deployed National Guard troops? Noem's face was now bright red. Those investments are in a blind trust managed by... A blind trust managed by your brother-in-law, Crockett interrupted. That's not very blind, is it, Governor? This is a witch hunt, Noem suddenly shouted, standing up from her chair. You're trying to criminalize legitimate policy differences. No, Governor, Crockett responded calmly, not intimidated by the outburst. I'm trying to understand why you sent South Dakota National Guard troops to the border, not for security, but to create business opportunities for your donors and increase the value of your own investments. How dare you? Noem's voice cracked with anger. I have spent my entire career fighting for the safety of American citizens. Have you? Crockett asked, pulling out yet another document. Because I have here a memo from your own National Guard commander expressing concerns about the deployment. He writes, and I quote, "The mission parameters seem designed more for media coverage than operational effectiveness. Our troops are being used as props for political theater. Did you ever respond to these concerns, Governor?" Noem was now standing, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Her staff was frantically trying to get her to sit down, but she waved them off. I don't have to sit here and listen to these baseless accusations. They're not baseless, Governor, Crockett said, maintaining her calm demeanor. They're documented, and there's more. She pulled out another folder. Would you like me to share the emails between you and Sterling about the planned expansion of private detention facilities? Or should we discuss the contracts your husband's company received for transportation services related to the deployment? This is character assassination, Noem shouted. Several Capitol police officers moved closer to the witness table, ready to intervene if necessary. No, Governor, Crockett replied firmly. This is accountability. You told the people of South Dakota that you were sending their National Guard to protect them from an invasion, But in reality, you were using their tax dollars and their soldiers to enrich yourself and your donors. That's not character assassination. That's fraud. The committee chairman was banging his gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order, but the damage was done. Noem's carefully constructed image was crumbling in real time, broadcast live to millions of Americans. "Governor Noem, please return to your seat," the chairman ordered. But Noem was beyond listening. Her political instincts told her that staying in that chair, facing more questions, would only make things worse. She needed to get out, to regroup, to figure out how to respond to these devastating revelations. "I need a recess," Noem demanded. "My counsel needs time to review these alleged documents." "Governor, you're here voluntarily," the chairman reminded her. "You can request a brief recess, but—" "No," Crockett interjected. "I'm not finished. The American people deserve answers now, not after the governor's team has time to craft spin and talking points." She pulled out one final document, and this was the one that would send Noem running from the room. "Governor, this is a contract between Sterling Defense Contractors and the state of South Dakota. Signed by you personally, dated 6 months ago. It guarantees Sterling exclusive rights to provide security technology for South Dakota's Border Security Initiative. The contract is worth $50 million over 5 years. Governor, South Dakota doesn't have a border with Mexico. What border security initiatives could possibly require $50 million in a landlocked northern state?" The room fell completely silent. Every eye was on Noem, waiting for her response. The cameras captured her face cycling through emotions: shock, anger, fear, and finally desperation. "I need to consult with counsel," Noem stammered. "The contract includes a very interesting clause," Crockett continued, relentless in her pursuit of the truth. "It states that the contract value increases by 20% for every additional state that adopts South Dakota's innovative border security model. Governor, were you planning to franchise your fake border crisis to other non-border states? Were you and Mr. Sterling planning to create a nationwide network of unnecessary security contracts funded by taxpayer dollars and justified by manufactured fear? That was the breaking point." Noem grabbed her papers, shoving them haphazardly into her briefcase. "This hearing is a sham," she shouted. "This is nothing but a political hit job. Governor Noem, you have not been excused," the chairman called out, but Noem was already moving. "I'm done here," Noem declared, standing up so abruptly that she knocked over her water glass. The liquid spread across the table, soaking into the documents she left behind. "My office will respond to these outrageous allegations through proper channels." As she stormed toward the exit, Crockett delivered one final blow. "Governor, running away doesn't change the facts. The American people deserve to know how you exploited their fears about border security to line your own pockets. You can leave this room, but you can't escape the truth." Noem stopped at the door, turning back with fury in her eyes. "You'll be hearing from my lawyers, Representative Crockett." "This isn't over." "You're right, Governor," Crockett replied calmly. "It's just beginning. I'm sure the Ethics Committee and the Department of Justice will be very interested in these documents." With those words, Kristi Noem yanked open the heavy wooden door and stormed out of the hearing room, her heels clicking angrily on the marble floor of the Capitol building. Her staff scrambled to follow, leaving behind a chaos of papers, overturned chairs, and stunned silence. The cameras captured every second the mighty governor of South Dakota, the conservative firebrand who had built her brand on strength and defiance, fleeing like a guilty defendant caught red-handed. The hearing room exploded into chaos the moment the door slammed shut. Committee members were shouting over each other, reporters were rushing to file their stories, and the gallery erupted in a mixture of gasps, applause, and heated discussion. The chairman pounded his gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order, but it was like trying to hold back a tsunami with a teaspoon. "Order! We will have order!" the chairman shouted, his face red with exertion. "This hearing will continue despite the witness's departure." Jasmine Crockett sat calmly at her desk, organizing her documents with the methodical precision of someone who had just delivered a masterclass in political accountability. She wasn't celebrating or gloating, she was simply doing her job, and she wasn't finished yet. "Mr. Chairman," Crockett said, once the room had settled slightly, "I would like to enter all of these documents into the official record." "Without objection, so ordered," the chairman replied, still looking stunned by what had just transpired. Crockett continued, Mr. Chairman, what we've witnessed today is not just about one governor's corruption. This is about a systematic exploitation of American fears for personal profit. Governor Noem came here today expecting to deliver talking points about border security. Instead, she was confronted with evidence of a scheme that should outrage every American, regardless of political party. The Republican committee members were scrambling to respond. Representative Jim Jordan from Ohio grabbed his microphone. "This is an ambush, plain and simple. Governor Noem should have been given these documents in advance." "The governor has had these documents, Congressman Jordan," Crockett responded smoothly. "She signed them. She wrote these emails, she negotiated these contracts. What she didn't expect was for anyone to connect the dots and expose the truth." Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez from New York leaned into her microphone. "Representative Crockett, can you summarize for the American people what these documents reveal?" Crockett nodded, turning to face the cameras. "What these documents reveal is a governor who used her position to create a fake crisis, deploy National Guard troops as political props, and funnel millions of taxpayer dollars to private contractors who kick back money to her through campaign contributions and personal investments. She turned border security, an issue of genuine concern for many Americans, into a personal ATM machine. The implications were staggering. As Crockett laid out the evidence, piece by piece, the full scope of the scandal became clear. The Patriot Defense Fund wasn't just a donor. It was essentially a money laundering operation, taking payments from defense contractors and funneling them to politicians who would ensure more contracts. Noem's deployment of National Guard troops wasn't about security, it was about creating justification for millions in security technology contracts that would benefit her financial backers. "Let me be clear," Crockett continued, her voice rising with controlled passion. "Every National Guard soldier who was sent to the border, away from their families and their regular duties, was used as a pawn in Governor Noem's financial scheme. Every South Dakota taxpayer who was told their money was protecting them from invasion was lied to. Every American who believed Governor Noem's rhetoric about border security was deceived." Meanwhile, outside the hearing room, Noem was in full damage control mode. Her communications team was huddled in a corner of the Capitol, frantically typing on their phones, trying to craft a response that could somehow minimize the catastrophe that had just unfolded on national television. "We need to attack Crockett's credibility," her communications director suggested desperately. "Say the documents were taken out of context, that this is a partisan witch hunt." But even as they strategized, they could see the writing on the wall. CNN had already broken into regular programming with a breaking news banner. "South Dakota governor storms out of hearing after explosive corruption allegations." Fox News, usually sympathetic to Republican governors, was running the headline, "Document Bombshell, Noem accused of border security profiteering." Back in the hearing room, Crockett was methodically walking through each document, building an airtight case that would be impossible to refute. He showed how Noem had coordinated with Sterling to create the appearance of a crisis, using carefully staged photo ops and misleading statistics to justify the deployment. She revealed emails where Noem and Sterling discussed maximizing ROI on the National Guard deployment, treating American soldiers like business assets. "This email particularly disturbs me," Crockett said, holding up a printed page. Governor Noem writes to Mr. Sterling, "The beauty of this arrangement is that the more fear we generate about the border, the more states will want to buy in. We could expand this model nationwide." Ladies and gentlemen, she wasn't trying to solve a crisis. She was trying to franchise it. The evidence kept coming. Financial records showing suspicious transfers, meeting logs placing Noem with defense contractor executives at luxury resorts, even recorded phone calls where the governor discussed the business opportunity of the century with potential investors. It was a corruption case that would make history books, all unveiled in one devastating congressional hearing. Representative Adam Schiff from California asked a question everyone was thinking. "Representative Crockett, do you believe Governor Noem's actions constitute criminal conspiracy?" "I'm not a prosecutor, Congressman Schiff," Crockett replied carefully, "but I believe these documents raise serious questions that law enforcement agencies need to investigate. At minimum, we're looking at potential violations of federal contracting laws, ethics violations, and possibly fraud." The hearing continued for another hour, with Crockett presenting document after document, each one adding another nail in the coffin of Noem's political career. She showed how the scheme extended beyond South Dakota, with similar arrangements being negotiated with governors in other Republican-led states. She revealed that sterling defense contractors had created a network of shell organizations, all funneling money to politicians who would support their border security theater. This wasn't just corruption, Crockett concluded. This was a conspiracy to defraud the American people, to profit off their legitimate concerns about national security, and to use our military service members as props in a money-making scheme. Governor Noem didn't just betray the trust of South Dakota voters, she betrayed the fundamental principles of public service. As the hearing finally adjourned, the political earthquake was already sending shockwaves across the country. Within minutes of the gavel falling, the hashtag Noemgate was trending on social media. Videos of Noem storming out of the hearing were being shared millions of times, becoming instant memes and the subject of countless commentary videos. Political analysts were calling it the most dramatic congressional hearing since Watergate. But perhaps most damaging for Noem was the reaction from her own party. Conservative commentators who had championed her as a rising star were distancing themselves. Tucker Carlson, who had interviewed Noem favorably just weeks earlier, opened his show that night with, "If these allegations are true and the documents seem pretty clear, then Kristi Noem has betrayed not just conservative principles but basic American values." Even Donald Trump, who had previously praised Noem as a potential running mate, released a statement through his spokesperson. "The president is deeply concerned by today's revelations and believes anyone who exploits border security for personal gain should be held accountable." The South Dakota National Guard Association released a scathing statement within hours. "Our brave men and women who served at the border deserve answers. If they were used as pawns in a financial scheme, those responsible must face justice." Back in the Capitol, Jasmine Crockett was surrounded by reporters, all clamoring for comments and additional information. She stood tall, composed despite the chaos around her, and delivered a statement that would be replayed countless times in the coming days. Today wasn't about partisan politics. It wasn't about Democrat versus Republican. It was about truth versus lies, transparency versus corruption, and the American people versus those who would exploit their fears for profit. Governor Noem had the opportunity to answer these questions, to explain these documents, to defend her actions. Instead, she ran. The American people can draw their own conclusions about what that means. As she walked away from the microphones, one reporter shouted a final question. "Representative Crockett, what happens next?" She turned back with a slight smile. "Justice. What happens next is justice." The fallout from Kristi Noem's explosive exit was immediate and devastating. Within hours of storming out of the congressional hearing, the governor's political world began collapsing like a house of cards in a hurricane. What started as a routine oversight hearing had transformed into one of the most significant political scandals of the decade, with implications that would reshape American politics for years to come. By that evening, the South Dakota state legislature had called an emergency session. Both Republican and Democratic lawmakers were demanding answers, with many calling for an immediate investigation into the governor's activities. The Republican Speaker of the House, who had been one of Noem's strongest allies, released a carefully worded statement. "The allegations raised today are deeply concerning and require immediate and thorough investigation. The people of South Dakota deserve answers and accountability." The calls for Noem's resignation began almost immediately. The editorial board of the Sioux Falls Argus-Leader, South Dakota's largest newspaper, published a scathing piece titled, "Governor Noem must resign immediately." They wrote, "The evidence presented today reveals a betrayal so profound, a corruption so complete, that Governor Noem has lost any moral authority to lead our state. Every day she remains in office is an insult to the hard-working people of South Dakota who trusted her with their votes and their tax dollars." But Noem wasn't going down without a fight. That evening she appeared on Newsmax, one of the few outlets still willing to give her a platform, attempting to salvage her reputation. Her appearance, however, only made things worse. She appeared frazzled, her usually perfect hair slightly disheveled, her makeup smudged from what appeared to be tears. When asked directly about the documents Crockett had presented, she struggled to provide coherent answers. This is a witch hunt, a deep state conspiracy to take down conservative leaders who stand for border security, Noem insisted, her voice cracking. Representative Crockett ambushed me with fabricated documents and taken out of context communications. The interviewer, even on the sympathetic network, pressed her. Governor, are you saying those documents were fake? The emails, the contracts, the financial records? Noem hesitated, a fatal pause that spoke volumes. I'm saying they were presented in a misleading way to create a false narrative. But did you write those emails? Did you sign those contracts? I need to consult with my legal team before discussing specifics, Noem replied, effectively confirming the authenticity of the documents without admitting guilt. The interview was a disaster, trending on social media for all the wrong reasons. The hashtag #NoemMeltdown joined Noemgate as people shared clips of the governor's fumbling responses and obvious deflections. Memes proliferated, with the image of Noem storming out of the hearing becoming the defining visual of political corruption and cowardice. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett was being hailed as a hero by government watchdog groups and anti-corruption advocates. She appeared on MSNBC's Rachel Maddow show that night, calmly and methodically walking through the evidence she had presented, providing additional context that made Noem's corruption even more apparent. What disturbs me most, Crockett told Maddow, is not just the personal enrichment but the exploitation of our National Guard members. These are brave men and women who signed up to serve their country, and they were used as props in a money-making scheme. Every one of them deserves an apology and answers. The Department of Justice moved with unusual speed. By Wednesday morning, less than 24 hours after the hearing, FBI agents were seen entering the South Dakota State Capitol building, carrying boxes and computer equipment. Sources close to the investigation told reporters that they were executing search warrants related to potential violations of federal corruption statutes, wire fraud, and conspiracy charges. The business implications were equally swift and severe. Sterling defense contractors' stock price plummeted by 40% in after-hours trading. Marcus Sterling, the CEO at the center of the scandal, released a statement through his lawyers denying any wrongdoing, but the damage was done. By Thursday, 3 major institutional investors had announced they were divesting from Sterling, and the company's board of directors called an emergency meeting to discuss Sterling's future with the company. Other governors who had been considering similar arrangements with Sterling and the Patriot Defense Fund rushed to distance themselves. Texas Governor Greg Abbott, who had welcomed South Dakota's National Guard troops, released a statement saying he had no knowledge of any financial improprieties and would be reviewing all agreements with private contractors involved in border security operations. Arizona's governor went further, announcing an immediate audit of all border security funding sources. The scandal was spreading beyond Noem. Investigation revealed that at least 6 other Republican governors had been in negotiations with Sterling defense contractors for similar arrangements. Emails leaked to the press showed a coordinated effort to create what Sterling had called the Border Security Industrial Complex, a nationwide network of unnecessary security contracts justified by manufactured crises and funded by taxpayer dollars. In South Dakota, the political implications were transforming into a constitutional crisis. The state's attorney general announced that his office would be conducting its own investigation, separate from the federal probe. The lieutenant governor, who would assume power if Noem resigned or was removed, tried to distance himself from the scandal, claiming he had no knowledge of the governor's arrangements with Sterling. By Thursday afternoon, the South Dakota legislature had begun impeachment proceedings. The articles of impeachment, drafted with remarkable speed, accused Noem of high crimes and misdemeanors, including corruption, breach of public trust, and using her office for personal enrichment. Even members of her own party were supporting the move, recognizing that their own political survival depended on distancing themselves from the toxic governor. The National Guard scandal was particularly damaging. Interviews with South Dakota National Guard members who had been deployed to the border revealed that many had suspected something was wrong. One sergeant, speaking on condition of anonymity, told CNN, "We were basically doing photo ops. We'd be positioned where the media could see us, but we weren't really doing anything operational. It felt like we were extras in a movie, not soldiers on a mission." Another Guard member was more direct. "We were taken away from our families, from our jobs, to be props in the governor's money-making scheme. It's disgusting. We deserve better from our leaders." The families of Guard members were even more outraged. A group of military spouses organized a protest outside the governor's mansion in Pierre, holding signs reading, "Our heroes are not for sale," and "Noem used our troops." The protest, which started with a few dozen people, grew to hundreds as the week progressed. On Friday morning, 5 days after the explosive hearing, Kristi Noem held a press conference at the governor's mansion. Many expected her to announce her resignation, but instead she came out swinging. Flanked by her lawyer, she announced that she was filing a defamation lawsuit against Jasmine Crockett and demanding a congressional investigation into what she called illegally obtained documents. "I will not be driven from office by lies and partisan attacks," Noem declared, reading from a prepared statement. "I have served the people of South Dakota with honor and integrity, and I will continue to do so, despite these baseless accusations." But even as she spoke, more damaging revelations were emerging. The New York Times had obtained additional documents showing that Noem had been planning to run for president in 2024, using the border security issue as her primary platform. Internal campaign documents showed that she planned to leverage her success in South Dakota to raise millions from defense contractors and private security companies who would benefit from a nationwide expansion of her policies. One particularly damaging email sent to potential campaign donors read, "Imagine the profits when every state needs border security technology, not just border states. I can make that happen from the White House." Jasmine Crockett responded to Noem's lawsuit threat with characteristic composure. At a press conference at the Capitol, she said, "Governor Noem can threaten all the lawsuits she wants. The truth is not defamation. The documents speak for themselves. If she wants to go to court, I welcome it. Discovery will only reveal more evidence of her corruption." Legal experts were unanimous in their assessment that Noem's defamation claim was baseless, a desperate attempt to change the narrative. "You can't sue someone for defamation when they're presenting your own documents and emails," explained Harvard law professor Lawrence Tribe. "This lawsuit will be dismissed quickly, but not before more damaging information comes out in discovery." By the weekend, Noem's support had completely evaporated. A poll conducted by the Sioux Falls Argus Leader found that 78% of South Dakota voters believed she should resign, including 62% of Republicans. Her approval rating had plummeted to just 18%, making her one of the least popular governors in American history. The Republican Governors Association, which Noem had once chaired, removed her from all leadership positions and canceled her appearance at their upcoming conference. The statement from the RGA was diplomatically worded but devastating in its implications. "The recent allegations require Governor Noem's full attention, and we believe it's best for her to focus on addressing these serious concerns." Conservative media, which had initially tried to defend Noem, began abandoning her as more evidence emerged. Even outlets like One America News and Breitbart published articles questioning her actions and calling for accountability. The conservative movement's thought leaders, recognizing the damage Noem's scandal could do to their cause, moved quickly to excommunicate her from their ranks. On Sunday morning, exactly 1 week after the hearing, the final blow came. The Wall Street Journal published an investigation revealing that Noem had been receiving monthly payments from a shell company linked to Sterling defense contractors for 2 years before becoming governor. The payments, totaling over $2 million, had been disguised as consulting fees, but appeared to be straightforward bribes to ensure her cooperation once in office. The Journal's investigation also revealed that similar payments had been made to politicians in 12 other states, exposing a nationwide corruption network that made Watergate look small by comparison. The FBI announced that it was expanding its investigation to include potential RICO charges, treating the scheme as an organized criminal enterprise. That evening, Noem's chief of staff and several senior advisors resigned en masse, releasing a joint statement saying they could no longer serve an administration that had lost the trust of the people and violated the principles of public service. The rats were fleeing the sinking ship, and Noem was increasingly alone in her defiance. Monday morning brought more bad news. The South Dakota Supreme Court ruled that the impeachment proceedings could move forward, rejecting Noem's emergency petition to halt the process. The House Impeachment Committee announced they would begin hearings immediately, with a vote expected by the end of the week. Federal prosecutors, meanwhile, were preparing criminal charges. Sources within the Department of Justice told reporters that indictments were imminent, with charges expected to include wire fraud, conspiracy, bribery, and violations of the Hobbs Act. Legal experts predicted that Noem could face decades in prison if convicted on all charges. The impact on the Republican Party was severe. With midterm elections approaching, candidates across the country were forced to answer questions about Noem and border security corruption. Many who had accepted donations from the Patriot Defense Fund or Sterling defense contractors scrambled to return the money and distance themselves from the scandal. The scandal also reignited debates about campaign finance reform and the influence of private money in politics. Democrats seized on the scandal to push for stricter regulations on private funding of government operations, while some Republicans joined the call for reform, recognizing that the corruption had damaged their party's credibility on border security issues. Jasmine Crockett, meanwhile, had become a national figure overnight. She was flooded with interview requests, book offers, and speaking engagements. But she remained focused on her work, using her newfound platform to push for anti-corruption legislation and transparency reforms. A bill she introduced, the No Private Armies Act, which would prohibit private funding of National Guard deployments, gained bipartisan support. 2 weeks after the hearing, the inevitable finally happened. Facing certain impeachment, criminal indictment, and complete political isolation, Kristi Noem announced her resignation as governor of South Dakota. In a brief statement delivered from the governor's mansion, she maintained her innocence but said she was stepping down to focus on clearing my name and fighting these false charges. Her resignation speech was watched by millions, but not for the reasons she might have hoped. Instead of a dignified exit, it became another viral moment as Noem appeared to break down, crying on camera and blaming everyone from the deep state to the mainstream media to jealous rivals for her downfall. The speech was so unhinged that even her remaining supporters were embarrassed, with one conservative commentator calling it the most pathetic political exit in American history. The lieutenant governor was sworn in immediately, promising to restore integrity to the office and cooperate fully with all investigations. One of his first acts was to terminate all contracts with Sterling defense contractors and return the remaining funds from the Patriot Defense Fund to the state treasury. Marcus Sterling was arrested 3 days later at his mansion in Texas, charged with multiple federal crimes related to the bribery and corruption scheme. He was denied bail after prosecutors argued he was a flight risk with significant resources and international connections. The image of Sterling being led away in handcuffs became another defining visual of the scandal. As the dust settled, the full scope of the damage became clear. The Noem Gate scandal had exposed a massive corruption network, destroyed political careers, and shaken public faith in government. But it had also shown that accountability was possible, that one determined representative with evidence and courage could bring down even the most powerful politicians. Jasmine Crockett reflected on the experience in an interview with 60 Minutes a month after the hearing. "I didn't go into that hearing planning to end anyone's career," she said. "I went in there to get the truth. The fact that the truth was so damaging says everything about how corrupt the system had become. But it also shows that our democracy still works, that oversight still matters, and that no one is above the law." The scandal's impact on border security policy was significant. The exposure of how politicians had exploited the issue for personal gain forced a more honest conversation about immigration and border protection. Real solutions, based on evidence rather than fear-mongering, began to gain traction. The National Guard troops who had been used as pawns received formal apologies and compensation for their misuse. Several states passed laws prohibiting private funding of National Guard deployments, ensuring that military decisions would be based on security needs rather than donor interests. Federal legislation followed, with the Guard Protection Act passing with overwhelming bipartisan support, establishing strict guidelines for when and how National Guard troops could be deployed for border operations. The legal consequences continued for years. Noem was eventually convicted on multiple federal charges and sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Sterling received 12 years for his role as the ringleader of the conspiracy. Dozens of other politicians, contractors, and intermediaries were also prosecuted, making it one of the largest corruption cases in American history. The political consequences were equally lasting. The Republican Party underwent a painful reckoning with how the border security issue had been corrupted and exploited. New leaders emerged who promised transparency and accountability, while those tainted by connections to the scandal found their careers permanently damaged. For Jasmine Crockett, the hearing that changed everything launched her into national prominence. She became a leading voice on government reform and anti-corruption efforts, eventually running for and winning a Senate seat. Her memoir, The Documents Don't Lie, became a bestseller, with all proceeds donated to organizations supporting military families. The Noem scandal entered the history books as a cautionary tale about the dangers of political corruption and the importance of oversight. Political science textbooks included case studies of the hearing, analyzing how one representative's preparation and courage had exposed a nationwide conspiracy. It became required viewing in ethics courses, a reminder of what can happen when public service is corrupted by private greed. But perhaps the most important legacy of that explosive Tuesday morning hearing was the message it sent to corrupt politicians everywhere. You can run, you can storm out, you can deny and deflect, but eventually, the truth catches up. The documents don't lie, and in a democracy, even the most powerful can be held accountable. As we reflect on this incredible political drama, it serves as a reminder of why civic engagement matters, why oversight is essential, and why we must always demand transparency from our leaders. The image of Kristi Noem storming out of that hearing room will forever symbolize what happens when corruption is exposed to the light of truth. It's a reminder that in America, no one is above the law, and that democracy, though sometimes messy and contentious, still works when citizens and their representatives do their duty. This story isn't just about one corrupt governor or one brave representative. It's about the ongoing struggle between those who would use public office for private gain and those who fight for accountability and justice. It's a struggle that continues every day in city councils, state legislatures, and the halls of Congress, and it's a struggle that requires all of us to stay informed, stay engaged, and stay vigilant. So as we close this chapter on one of the most dramatic political scandals in recent memory, remember that democracy isn't a spectator sport. It requires active participation, constant vigilance, and the courage to stand up to corruption wherever we find it. The next Jasmine Crockett could be in your community, and the next Kristi Noem could be in your state house. The question is, will you be watching, and will you be ready to act when the truth needs to be told? Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more in-depth coverage of the political stories that shape our nation. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our breaking coverage of government accountability and the fight against corruption. Share this story with others who need to know what happened in that hearing room. And leave a comment below telling us what you think should happen next in the fight for transparent, honest government. Together we can ensure that public service means serving the public, not serving yourself. The story of Kristi Noem's downfall is more than just political drama. It's a testament to the power of truth, the importance of oversight, and the enduring strength of American democracy when citizens and their representatives refuse to accept corruption. Remember this story, share this story, and most importantly, let it inspire you to demand better from all our leaders. Because in the end, they work for us, and we have not just the right, but the responsibility to hold them accountable.